the 26 furry comics that you need to know about. Hey everyone, it's vmcampos comic book fan, and welcome to another video where I do a deep dive, long view in the world of comics. This time it's 26 comics A through Z in the world of furry comics. Let's get to it. One of the most important anthologies was ALBEDO Anthropomorphics, published by Stephen A. Gallacci's Thoughts and Images. Publishing on and off for over 20 years, this was an anthology series featuring a variety of characters. The big ones, of course, were Irma Felna of the EDF and Stan Sakai's Usagi Yojimbo. Here's one of the super rare number zeros. CGC 9.2. Bucky O'Hare was published over at Neil Adams Continuity Comics with creators Larry Hama and Michael Golden. This was a comic book, action figures, video game, Saturday morning cartoon. It had it all. Here's one of the rare newsstand editions. No list of furry comics would be complete if it didn't mention Critters. 50 issues of this anthology series published in the mid to late 80s, and it went on for 50 issues with a bunch of creators, a bunch of stories, a bunch of styles. Really cool series. Highly recommended. Thank you, Kim Thompson, for believing in furry comics. This was a show that I would watch with my family on USA Network back in the 90s. It was so irreverent, and at the time I didn't even know it was based on a comic book. Yep, from Dark Horse Comics, Everett Peck's Private Dick Family Man was first a comic book until it went on to superstardom on television, basic cable, of course. For old school gray muzzles, those would be furries from the old days. You all remember Graphics Express's Equine the Uncivilized, their furry take on Conan the Barbarian, or perhaps Claw the Unconquered. This was a swords and sorcery barbarian, funny animal comic of the time, created by Richard Conkle and Jim Grote. It only lasted 7 issues. Issue number 6 is really big bucks, and issue number 2 features the debut of another famous horse character, which we'll get to later. And once again, any list of furry comics would be woefully incomplete if it didn't mention Furrlough, the long-running series at 160-something issues. This was an anthology series in black and white that first focused on military aspects of the furry fandom. It later went on to include just everything furry, put it in there. You really get a sense that this comic was all about big guns and big bunnies. Another classic furry comic, Genus, which is another long-running series. It semi-retired at issue number 96, which was recently-ish funded on an Indiegogo campaign or GoFundMe or whatever. Here's issue number 1. Dig that 90s foil cover. First issue featuring some body paint on fur. I don't know how that works. But yep, this is for mature readers only. And if you notice, up until now, these furry comics have not been these XXX rated yiff fests that everyone thinks they are. There's a whole range of furry comics, but this is one of the big famous ones. Martin Wagner's Hepcats is another big name in the world of furry comics for the gray muzzles out there. A semi-autobiographical story about 4 college kids that just happen to be furry characters. It took a few issues to get to the big storyline, Snowblind, and then it became one of the most critically acclaimed comics out there, furry or otherwise. I had to reach a little bit for the letter I, so how about Interplanetary Lizards of the Texas Plains? Beautiful painted cover, black and white interiors. I don't have much to say about this except that it was a little bit later than the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles craze of comics that happened in 86, 87. But yet we got an I title right here. If you know any other I furry comics, tell me in the comments. I also bent the rules a little bit for J. Here we have Jack, Adventures of Captain, the, also known as The Adventures of Captain Jack. Here's this wonderful Mike Kazela book that went on for 12 issues or so. This was the big controversial issue where they had to put mature readers only. There's a little bit of nudity in the storyline here. between these two characters. And this was a great series that I picked up issue number 5 first. I loved it. I went back and got the previous issues, and then I got the whole series, and I'm sad that that's also a semi-incomplete series. But what there is of it, snap them up. They're in trade paperbacks, and get yourself a copy of this story. Oh, the black and white explosion of the 80s. Here it continues with Kamikaze Cat #1 by Pied Piper Comics. This is from 1986. So it's a mixture of noir, published at the time of, hey, everyone can publish a comic in black and white. And everyone did. Yep. Oh boy. So over at Blackthorn Publishing, we have Laffin Gas, Mutant Ninja Mutants issue. So this was published at the time to capitalize on the Ninja Turtles craze, because we've got featuring adolescent radioactive black belt hamsters, the untold story, plus colossal nuclear bambino samurai snails, adolescent maniacal samurai hares, preteen dirty jean kung fu kangaroos, and radioactive wrestling rodents. So yep. Really, really capitalizing on the TMNT craze, throw everything at the wall, see what sticks. And this is just, sign of the times. If you had some sort of furry character with some adjectives and such, you could get your own book, such as mildly microwave prepubescent kung fu gophers. Amazing art by Phil Folio on the cover. It's actually a wraparound cover. This is from Just Imagine Comics. Yep, this is issue #1. Get on the TMNT train and don't get off. May I interest you in the naive interdimensional commando koalas? It's the first issue. And also the adolescent radioactive black belt hamsters are in this issue. So the big names are giving some shine to the newcomers. Cashing in. Another one of the big names in furry comics, Reed Waller and Kate Worley's Omaha the Cat Dancer. A wonderful story full of characters, heart, intrigue, and lots of sex. This is an X-rated comic, but that's not the main thrust of this comic. It is the actual plot and the story of the main character, her boyfriend, and all of the trials and tribulations that they must endure. First published at Steel Dragon Press, this is a first print $1.60, and this is also one of those classic furry comics that everyone must know about, if you're an adult. On completely the other side of the coin, a very G-rated Penguin and Pencil Gwyn. This is Ruben and Ye's work. Self-published comics in the 80s, black and white, beautiful, fun cover. Yeah, we got the main characters, Pen Gwyn and Pencil Gwyn, and they're having gentle adventures. Now, you might think of furry comics as more of a somewhat modern thing, but actually, let's go back to the 70s. Even the early 70s, we had these underground comics being published by the Freaks in San Francisco. You might know Zap Comics and the like, but there were a lot of furry comics in that first wave of underground comics. You know, the Robert Crumbs of the day, Spain Rodriguez, Bobby London, etc. But we had creators such as Trina Robbins, Lee Mars, and more. And then we also have this series Quack, #1, published for the astronomical rate of $1.25 at that time. Wonderful painted covers, black and white interiors on really cheap paper. You'll be lucky to get a decent quality copy of these old underground comics. More famous than Equine the Uncivilized, we have Red Shetland. So, yep, popping out of issue #2 of Equine the Uncivilized, we have here the furry version of Red Sonja, she-devil with a sword. She was the more famous of the two Graph Express characters, 11 issues versus 7. The character at first seems kind of one note, just a furry version of Red Sonja, but actually has some fun humor, adventures. Issue #4 is actually kind of violent. Very realistic violence in the times of swords and sorcery. And then we get a little bit of a love story on the final issues, and then an unresolved cliffhanger on issue 11 that was never completed. Wherever there's an incomplete series, there is a complete series, and then there's a long-running series. Shanda the Panda went on for 50 issues, recently ended within the last 3 years or so. Starting in the 90s, this was a series that took 20 years to complete on and off. Starting over at Moo Press, and then went on to their own Shanda Fantasy Arts to complete it. Shanda Bruin is this very cute character, works at a movie theater. That's why we've got this T2 parody on the cover. Just a lot of characters and plot and relationships, and yes, a little bit of sexiness. This is one of the quintessential classic furry comics you must read. From the Mikes, Mike Segarra and Mike Curtis. For T, of course, we've got to talk about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Here's my issue number 1, 5th print. But instead, how about Tank Vixens? 4-issue limited series where we cover the annals of the 101st Heavy Tank Crushing Battalion. Another Mike Segarra joint over here. It's just a fun, very cheeky story where instead of violence, we have sexy vixens on the battlefield. Not to diminish any of the comics on the series, but this is the #1 furry comic of all time, Stan Sakai's Usagi Yojimbo. First published in 1984, over in ALBEDO actually. This comic is still being published. This has been a long-running, creator-owned comic that debuted back in the 80s. Here's issue number 1, which is big bucks. Here's issue number 1, second printing, which is also big bucks. Not his first appearance, however. That was back in ALBEDO number 2, which is this book right here. Nice. All right, so here's another one that you've got to help me out. I don't have any V's on the list, so I had to dig deep, and I got here Neil Adams' Valeria, the She-Bat, from Windjammer, aka Acclaim Comics. Yeah, there were only like 2 issues of this as an incomplete series. She was supposed to team up with Spawn, I think. I don't know how really furry you would count it on my list here, but she's a she-bat. The design is different from issue 1 and 2 on the cover, but we got Neil Adams art. Yeah. At W, we've got Wildlife, another anthology series. You couldn't wander through the 90s without tripping over an anthology furry series. There were just so many of them out there, and here's one of the better ones. Wildlife, amazing Joe Rosales cover art right here. Went on for like 12 issues or something. Just a bunch of different fun little comics with various creators. As I recall, pretty G-rated stuff, so here's one to track down and check out some fun 90s comics. Of course, we've got an X comic. No, it's not X-rated. We've got Vicky Wyman's Xanadu. This is the first miniseries, 5 issues, published at Thoughts and Images, Steve Galacci's company that published ALBEDO. This is a 5-issue series. It's just a swashbuckling adventure yarn, black and white interiors as par for the course. Just a fun series. I've bent the rules a little bit here for Y. Here we have Yarf, issue number 5. These are hard to get. This is the Journal of Applied Anthropomorphics. This is a fanzine. It's bigger than a regular-sized comic. It's $5 whole, published in the 90s. This is one of these books where a bunch of creators got together, submitted stories and art, and then they bound it all together and shipped it off to people all over the country. And this was before the widespread use of the internet. This is how the fandom reached out to each other. But this is just a classic early furry comic from back in the day. And we'll finish off Furry Comics A through Z with Zorch Comics number 1, published in 1999 by Mike Kazela. Kazela has worked in the world of animation. He's worked at Marvel Comics, a lot of independent comics. He was the creator of that Captain Jack comic I showed you earlier. And here's a sort of anthology collection of his various funny furry comic strips all in one, Zorch Comics. And for a long time, this was a one-shot until just about 18 years later, literally, Zorch Comics number 2 was published. Published in 1999, published in 2017, which it even says in the indicia, Zorch Comics published once every 18 years. I was happy to get my issue number 2 of this to finally complete the series. Well, I'll see you in 2032 when we get issue number 3 of Zorch Comics. By then, they'll probably cost $6.95. 26 comics A through Z, and there's probably some that you were yelling at the screen, don't forget about this one! Tell me about it in the comments! Tell me if you've previously heard about these books, which was your favorite one. Tell me about any of these comics that intrigue you and you want to check out for the first time. Are you an old school furry fan? Are you a new school furry fan? Do furries disgust you? Get out of here with that shit opinion. Furries and comics are fun. Let's keep it fun. In the meantime, if you really like this video, head on over to my Patreon, patreon.com/vmcampos, and consider pledging to the channel to keep it going, to keep it funded. I would really appreciate it. Or if you want to stay here in YouTube, there's a join button over here somewhere. Click the join button, or maybe give a thanks. That's another way to keep this channel going. You'll be a part of it if you contribute. As for the moment, I gotta go. I gotta read my limited edition copy of Space Usagi #1 with a Peach Momoko cover. This has been VM Campos, and I'll see you in the next video.